Have you ever been in a knitting quandary when you are knitting in the round of what length circular needle you need? If you have, you are not alone, and this video will certainly help you out with that. Okay, so let's talk about the anatomy of a circular needle. What is a circular needle to start with? Okay, so many of us will have started knitting on straight needles, and usually in straight, flat pieces. And the size of a needle is that the kind of relates to the diameter or the thickness or the thinness. Okay. And so we would have UK imperial sizes. If you're of a certain age, you'll remember we've got our sort of 8s and 10s sort of thing. And in American, that's a similar sort of system, but the numbers aren't the same. So, but it's a numerical system that relates to the thickness or the thinness of your needle. And metric is measured in millimeters, and that's actually the diameter that of how wide that needle is. So that's your 4 this is a 4 millimeter. Okay, so the size relates to the thickness or the thinness, but when it comes to circular needles, we've also got the length to consider. Okay, so a circular needle is a bit like having 2 needles, but it's all in one. Okay, and I will show you what I mean. So you have your needle tips, that's the bit that you're knitting with, but then they are just joined with a cable. Okay, and some of them are, that's a permanent arrangement, they're fixed circular needle, so that is not super glued, but that's not gonna, you don't take that on and off, it's all in one piece. And so you would have whatever size you have, but you might need multiples of these in different lengths depending on your projects, and we'll get to that in a bit. Okay, another sort of circular is interchangeable, and that is like it sounds on the tin. So that means your needle tip can detach, okay, like so. Yeah, and you've got the cords are separate, and the joy of that is you could have the one size tip, but you can get multiple lengths depending on the sort of project. So you got like from really short lengths of cord, okay, to much longer. Okay, so in terms of how they're measured though, it's not, if we're talking about the sizes, like we might have 40 centimeter, 60 centimeter, 80 centimeter, so that's 16, 24 or 32 inches. We're not talking about just the length of the cord, that relates to the actual length of the needle from the tip to the end of the other tip. And it's roughly that, because there is a bit of variation in terms of and what I mean roughly that is this may be a 60 centimeter one, and but it might just measure like 61 or something like that from actual tip to tip. Okay, but in essence it's a 60. And there is some variation in terms of things like the length of the tip. Okay, so the longer the length, you're more likely get a more substantial length of needle tip, and that's just to make it easier to handle. The shorter the length, the shorter the needle will be. In fact, you can get some really quite small kind of sock circulars that have got a tiny little stumpy needle tips, and that may be something you enjoy using or not. Okay, so and the difference between the length of the needle can be quite a lot. So for example, these are both 3 millimeters. That's a 3 millimeter circular, and that's about a 60, I believe. And then we've got a much shorter one, 40, for a smaller project. And you can see that the needle tip is substantially smaller. And that's because when you're knitting in a much smaller diameter, you've not got so much room to maneuver. Okay. Slightly off topic, because we are talking about the length of circular needles today, I do just want to share a bonus tip about how to deal with the sizes of circular needles. Now, my tip of the day is around all circular needles will, when they're new, have somewhere written what the size of that needle tip is. So it might be on the tip if it's interchangeables. Sometimes if it's a fixed, it might be on the cord. But either way, it's not much use to me. I can't see that. Often, if you've used your needles quite a bit, whether it's wooden ones or metal ones, that number, that written typed in number, just wears away with use, and I've got no chance of being able, without a neutron microscope, be able to see what that is. So tip of the day is the good old, and I call this my needle measuring doofer, but I believe the technical term is a knitting gauge. Okay, and you can pick these up cheap as chips, or they're also often a freebie in a magazine. Okay, for example, that one was from Simply Knitting. I would say have multiples of this. You can get some very nice flash ones as well. I do aspire to getting a very nice wooden one. Have one that you keep with wherever you're storing your circular needles, keep that there. So when you're going to pick some out for a new project, great, it's handy dandy. And these are great because you can work out basically what size it is by sticking the needle in there. I would also have one in each project bag if you've got a couple of projects on the go, and you're using your circulars for those projects. I use circulars all the time, to be honest, whether I'm knitting in the round or flat, and that way, you can check whether you've got the right needle, and if you've got interchangeable needles, whether you have indeed picked out a pair rather than a 4 and a 4.5, for example. Not that I've ever done that before or had a funny result. Anyway, that's my extra bonus tip. So moving on to our next bit. So why can't you just use one? When I was a young knitter back in the day, I thought that you pretty much grabbed what you got. And where that's possible, by all means do. Don't always think you've got to rush out and buy something new. And then I had a project I was knitting, and it was just going horribly wrong. It was just getting all kinked up, twisting all the time. And I asked my friendly wool shop owner, who was very knowledgeable, and said, well, that's because your needle is too long. So the biggest problem with knitting with circular needles in the round is that your needle being too long. Okay, you've got much more leeway in terms of how short your needle can be, but in essence, your needle needs to be no longer than the circumference of what you're knitting. Okay, and then you can knit in a cylinder. Okay, so this is like a cowl. Now, the needle that I need for this cowl would be very different to the needle for this cowl, for example. So this one's designed to be, I've got a clash of the yellows going on here, haven't I? But a much, fuller, longer, kind of oversized scarfy sort of cowl. So it's knitted on with quite a large circumference, okay? And also, if you imagine the body of something, if you're knitting a garment, will be quite big. And what then you might also need to accommodate much smaller circles, like for instance a glove, or a mitt. Okay, and I mean, there's thinking of a thumb hole's really small, thinking of cuffs, but like the cuff end of a sleeve's quite small. But the top sleeve will need a bigger. So you do need to be aware of the needs of your needle length as your project changes. Okay, so how do we work it out? That's our next step. So and this is where we get to some maths. For those of you who are maths phobic, by all means hop along to the next bit. But we'll be looking at how to work it out for yourself, which is helpful. But we'll also be looking at a ready reckoner that I've taken the pain of the maths away to make a free downloadable tool that you can get from my website. And I'll put the link in the description below, but I want to explain how that tool actually works as well, and what your options are, because truth is, it may be there's a few different sizes, a range of sizes that will work perfectly well for your circumference of knitting you're trying to achieve. Okay, so there's decisions on which of the options might be the best one for you at that time for that project. So I have actually got a blog post that accompanies this video, so I'll leave the link for that in the description as well, so you can go, and you don't have to remember this all watching it. If you want a rough guide, the 8.5 inch or 12 inch, so that's 22 or 30 centimeters, is best for small tubes like socks, mittens, cuffs. Okay. Equally, you might need to, you know, use a different way of knitting in the round, like using 2 circulars, magic loop, or the double pointed needles. Okay, 40 centimeters or 16 inch, they're useful for sleeves, hats, and bodies of children's jumpers. Okay, and then 60 or 80 centimeters, so that's 24 or 32, work well for the bodies of most sweaters for adults. And then the longer needles, 100, 120, 140, etc., etc., they're usually used for, you know, very large projects, or projects in the flat. Okay, such as knitting, you know, a very long length one. You might use that for knitting along the edge of a blanket. You'd never get all those stitches on a pair of straight needles. Okay, so that's the rough guide, and that, you know, if that suits, that's fine. But if you need a bit more accuracy or want to be sure, you might be better off calculating the minimum or maximum length of circular needle that you need. Okay, or that will work with your project. Unfortunately, that does involve the M word. So if you're it's not a complicated math, so take it step by step. You've got this. But if maths isn't your bag, just skip to the next bit when we'll be looking at how to use the Ready Reckoner that I've made available, that you can download for free. I've put the link down below, but I will be going through how you actually use that. Okay, so we'll start with calculating the longest circular needle you can use, and we'll just talk through this example. This example, we've got a project with 110 stitches and a tension or gauge of 22 stitches to 10 centimeters or 4 inches. Now, it doesn't matter if you want to do this in centimeters or inches, just pick the one and stick with it throughout. Okay, don't start changing to inches halfway through. So step 1, calculate the number of stitches per centimeter or per inch. Okay, so what we do, we get that 22 stitches, divide it by 10 centimeters, or divide it by 4 for the 4 inches, and that gives you either 2.2 stitches per centimeter or 5.5 stitches per inch. Okay, step 2, then you divide your total number, your project stitches, by that number. Okay, so 110 divided by 2.2 gives you it in centimeters, and 110 divided by 5.5 will give you the inches. So that gives us 50 centimeters or 20 inches. Now, it's not often you can get 50 centimeter circular length. You can get cords for that. It's an unusual size, to be honest. So what you want to do is go to the size nearest that, as in round it down to the nearest you know, regular size. So the longest needle in this case then would be a 40 centimeter needle or 16 inch. Okay, wasn't so bad, was it? Right, next stage then, we're going to look at calculating the shortest circular needle, and it's very similar, we've just got an additional step. Okay, but this example, we're going to use a project that's got 352 stitches. Tension gauge is the same, 22 stitches to 10 centimeters or 4 inches. So to calculate the number of stitches, it's what we did before, of stitches per centimeter or inch. So it's the 22 divided by the 10 centimeters or the 4 for inches. So that gives you 2.2 stitches per centimeter or 5.5 per inch. Okay, Then you divide your total project stitches by that number. So we have 352 stitches, and we're going to divide that by 2.2 to give us the centimeters, or by 5.5 to give us the inches. Okay, and then that leaves us with 160 centimeters or 64 inches. Okay, but what we want to do is find the shortest needle we can work with, and to calculate that, the cord of the needle will take about 3 times the length of the total needle. Okay, but we add on an extra bit for the needle length as well. Okay, so how that works in practice is, so we divide our 160 centimeters or 64 inches first by 3, and then we add 25 centimeters or 10 inches for the both needle tips. Okay, so that leaves us with 78.3 centimeters or 31.25 inches. And then we need to, so this is this, we're looking at what's the smallest we can get away with. So we need to round that up then to the nearest circular needle size. So the shortest needle we use here is 80 centimeters or 32 inches. Okay, hopefully that didn't hurt too much. We'll move on to looking at our ready reckoner. So here's our ready reckoner. This is just a straightforward PDF that you can download, but it's done all the maths for you. So all you need to do is put in what your stitch gauge or tension is, and that's down this column here to the left. And then along the top, we've got different needle sizes, needle lengths, in fact. And then as you go down, you can see, depending on the stitch gauge, what the sort of range of stitches that particular length of needle can handle. So if we look at having, we'll pick 28, that's about sort of 4-ply-ish fingering weight tension or gauge, and then you just look across that line till you find a range that your stitch count will fall in between. In this example, let's say that's 312 stitches, so we can see that fit in there. It fits in that range, it fits in this range, she says, but that's about it. It's then 312, we're then gone out of range. So if we go up here, then we can see that 60 will do, an 80, that's 32 inches, or 140 inch. So that's your options. And there are a number of factors to consider about your project, which will make any of those the better choice for you. If it's just a straightforward up and down cylinder, then yeah, I would you can always just plump for the middle one. Anyway, we'll move on now to look at why you might choose the 60 over the 80 over the 100 in this type of scenario. Okay, so now you might find you've got a few choices of length of circular that will work for your project. Okay, so which one do you choose? Well, it depends. But here's a number of factors you want to take into consideration. Okay, so let's say we've looked up using our reckoner, and we know that our project will suit a 60, an 80, or 100 centimeter, or whatever that is in inches. Okay, and so the first thing maybe to consider is, what have you actually already got? So if you've only got a 60, then maybe that's the way to go. Certainly if it's a plain cylinder shape like a cowl, okay, you know the needle size isn't going to change. So definitely whatever you've got, the 60, the 80 or the 100, use that one. Okay. If you haven't already got a needle, then I would be tempted to go more for the, if we've still got the same choice, 60, 80 or 100, I would be tempted to go more for the 80 or the 100. Okay, and that's because you can then use a longer needle to knit smaller circumferences using magic loop technique. Okay, I have got a video on how to do magic loop techniques, so I'm not going into it here. I'll link that below in the description, but you might want to try that out because that gives you really good flexibility with one needle. I think if you can kill two birds with one stone, although that's not a very nice expression, I know, then do that. And what that means is you could say like a hat. This hat, you'd start at the bottom on this circumference, but then as the hat goes up, we know once we get to the crown and the crown shaping, we know that that diameter, I keep wanting to say it, we know that that circumference is going to get smaller and smaller. And when you're talking about really small circumferences, of course, we might be in the realms then of double pointed needles. Again, not covering that today, but an option, you know, instead of having to get out the double pointed, is if you've got a suitable length needle, you can do magic loop. Okay, and to do that effectively, you want an 80 or a 60. So that might influence your decision. And it is thinking about also if you've got 60, 80, 100 choice, depends what you're knitting. You know, what's the change in requirements in terms of that circumference that you're going to be knitting. I've already talked about that in the hat, but say if it's a garment, then you've got different circumferences to play there, haven't you? And so, you know, the hem is gonna, you know, the bottom and the chest, you know, the hem of the garment, the chest across the bust is going to be a different circumference to perhaps sleeves, you know, sleeve tops or cuffs, or, you know, certainly the neckline. And the way that you're knitting will vary. So if you're knitting from the bottom up, you're going to start off with a larger circumference, and then by the time you've got up the top there, you're going to be needing a smaller circumference. So you're going to want to go more to the smaller of those three choices than the largest, perhaps. If you're knitting from the top down, you're starting on a relatively small circumference, and then you're increasing and you're working your way down, you know, you're increasing to the sort of final circumference of the hem. So yeah, it's just considering where your knitting's going to be going. So there may in fact be, you know, you may need multiple lengths for your project depending what that is, but you can minimize it by kind of making your choice. Or and that's where the interchangeables come in handy, I guess, is if you can choose the one size thickness of needle, and you can use a number of different cord lengths to get where you want to be. So, you know, we've covered, hopefully, you know, what is a circular needle, what are we measuring in terms of size versus length, why we might need different length needles for different projects or even different parts of the same project, and how we can calculate what that length needs to be. We know that it needs to not be longer than the circumference we're knitting, and we've got a bit of leeway depending how much we want to squish down on shorter lengths. Okay. You should be able to make a decision now on what's going to be the best length needle for your next project. I hope that's the case, and I look forward to hearing about those projects. Okay, that's it for now. Bye bye. See you again.